Fun Ideas Productions presents the Fun Ideas Podcast.
We see the syphilitic shrinking obelisk, the white man's wilting dick. We see through dangling jowls of seedy game show trolls the smiling lie of the televised hive. The witches are watching with their thousand eyes. Witches are watching with their thousand eyes. We smell rotten teeth that speak beyond belief. A stick inside their skull.
Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 46. This episode is sponsored by the fine folks at Lee's Comics.
Hi, I'm George Takei. You know me as Helmsman Sulu on Star Trek. When I'm not busy going Warp Factor 8, I like to beam down to Lee's Comics in Mountain View and spend a lazy afternoon reading comics classics from Marvel to DC, from Dark Horse to Fantagraphics, and everything in between. So please, spend some time here at Lee's Comics and spend your hard-earned cash.
The Fun Ideas Podcast is made possible by listeners like you and from Lee's Comics of California, selling you what your mother threw out since 1982, online at leescomics.com. I'm still working on my own Light Up Your Life travel agency, plus the Warren Kramer book, the TTV Underdog book, the Monkey Solo book, and the Mad book, plus all the articles I've discussed last episode, so I really have nothing new to report this week. Our guest today co-created his own comic book series of Captain Carrot and the Amazing Zoo Crew, worked for Hanna-Barbera, Rhino Records, Ogilvy and Mather, was the original artist on Sonic the Hedgehog for Archie Comics, designed cartoon statues for McFarlane, and drew the covers for both of my Monkeys books, among many, many other projects. Here he is, Scott Shaw. Okay, on the phone today we have Scott Shaw, and he is doing inking as we talk. How are you, Scott?
I'm fine, thanks, Mark. How are you?
Good. And as you know, I always ask, start off any interview, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got interested into cartooning.
Well, I'm a cartoonist, meaning that I write and draw funny stuff, and that's all I do is funny stuff. I have done some superhero stuff, but they've been funny superheroes, so that's as close as I ever got to any kind of legitimacy, I suppose. But I've worked in comic books, animated cartoons for TV, direct-to-video cartoons, lots of animated commercials. I've designed toys, and now I'm doing children's books and actually writing a book about comic books.
Cool.
I've been doing this for, 47 years, I think.
Oh, wow.
Finally figuring it out. I've been a very lucky guy. I've been able to work with a lot of the guys that I admired most when I was a kid, become friends with them. And I think cartooning may be the only profession left where that's possible.
Mm-hmm.
And in entertainment, at least.
Right.
So, I've done a lot of stuff, and I've done it because I love it, and I got into it like most cartoonists when I was a kid. Probably by the time I was 4 years old, I knew I wanted to be either a cartoonist or a paleontologist. And then the Flintstones came out in 1960, and I was 9 years old, and it was kind of like, well, that solves everything. I remember telling myself that's what I'm going to do, leaning forward to the TV set the first night it aired. And I worked on the Flintstones on and off during my whole career. I actually worked on a Flintstones project just a couple of years ago. And who knows? They're always talking about trying to bring them back, so I may be working on a new one any day.
Right.
But like most cartoonists, it seems like that's what you want to do when you're a kid. And at a certain point, I think I was in junior high, I was still kind of thinking about paleontology because everybody was acting like, well, cartooning, nobody can do that for a living. And when a teacher of mine told me that most paleontologists do not get a job with a museum or go out as explorers and finding new fossils, they wind up getting hired by oil companies to find, deposits of fossil plants that have been turned into gasoline.
Wow.
Or raw oil, I should say, not gasoline. But anyway, it would be a horrible application of the stuff I love. So I decided to stick with cartooning, and I get to draw dinosaurs a lot. So that's always
there you
fun.
go. Now, had you become a paleontologist, what would you have wanted to do if you could have your own way about it?
Oh, I would have liked to have been like a director at a museum.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Roy Chapman Andrews was my hero, and apparently a lot of other people too. He was one of the bases for Indiana Jones.
Mm-hmm.
But he was the director of the main curator of the New York Museum of Natural History,
mm-hmm.
and got lots of publicity. Wrote children's books about paleontology and being an explorer. Wrote books for adults. And apparently within his field was considered kind of like the Stan Lee of paleontology, particularly well liked by other people in the business because they felt he was constantly promoting himself. But to kids my age, he was like the poster boy for, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to be Roy Chapman Andrews.
Wow. Now, I didn't know this, and this kind of relates because you mentioned New York. I didn't know you were born in New York City. For some reason, I always thought you were born in San Diego. So, how long did you live in New York?
Only a few years. My dad was in the Navy,
mm-hmm.
and I was born in the Navy Hospital in Queens. But my dad had been in the Navy. He was a farm boy who joined the Navy in 1941, and went through boot camp in San Diego, and then was shipped out to Pearl Harbor.
Oh, wow.
And the ship that he was assigned to was capsized during the attack, and he was thrown overboard, but fortunately wasn't injured badly, real badly. So he wound up being in the Navy for many, many years. But he had wanted to be a cartoonist himself.
Oh.
Or at least an artist, a graphic artist, probably a sign painter more than anything. At least that was the thing that he thought he could do. But once he was made an officer in the Navy after Pearl Harbor attack, he never really looked back other than passing a lot of the stuff on that he was interested in to me that way.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, he had always said that he wanted to live in San Diego. So I was born in 1951 when he and my mom were living on Long Island. He was the aide to an admiral. So I think I was 2.5 years old when they moved to San Diego.
Oh, okay. And then you said he wanted to be a cartoonist. Did you do like some other cartoonists like Hank Ketchum that were in the Navy and Frank Hill that they actually did cartoons while in the Navy, or was it just a private dream that he had?
Just a private dream. In fact, it was so private, he never told me that while he was alive. I found out that he had goals to be a professional artist at his funeral when some from high school showed up.
Mm-hmm.
But he never told me anything, but he showed me how to use speedball pens when I was a boy. I mean, he really was into lettering.
Uh-huh.
But he taught me how to draw all sorts of things. In fact, I've got a little school book that I found that was his. That the first few pages are full of drawings of farm animals, and then he runs out of space or ideas, and he just resorts. He has a monkey, an ape. These are labeled monkey, ape, gorilla, and then Mickey Mouse. So kind of like me in that respect. It was like, after he got off the farm, he liked the same stuff as me.
That's really interesting and weird, that he wouldn't have connected with you while he was still around, that way.
I think my dad was a very soft-spoken guy, and he didn't want to sound like some a-hole trying to say, I was a big shot, I wanted to be a cartoonist too, because I was already, by the time I was 5, Dr. Seuss was my hero. I wanted to be Dr. Seuss. and then the Jay Ward and Hanna-Barbera stuff came along, and then Big Daddy Roth, and then, it was like one hero after another, Jack Kirby. So, I always wished my dad could have met Jack Kirby and they could have hung out, because they were both born the same year, and they were both, saw a lot of bad action during the war, but Kirby was in the European theater and my dad was all over the Pacific. So I would have always been, because my dad hated talking about the war, and Jack kind of liked talking about it only because he was a storyteller, so he kind of made stories much more exciting probably than reality really was.
Right.
But I always would have been interesting to see how the two of them would have interacted, because they were both from very poor families, but Jack was from an urban environment. My dad was from a farm.
Interesting. When did your dad pass away, just out of curiosity?
In 1986.
Oh, okay. So you were already established as a cartoonist. That's
yeah. He was very pleased. One time, he didn't know I overheard him, but we went out to dinner with, I guess, a couple of my parents' friends, and I overheard him tell one of his buddies, he says, "My kid makes more in a month than I ever made in a week."
Now, one thing I know about that you've mentioned many times, like on Facebook and stuff like that, so it seems like they were encouraging the artist in you, is you have that Fred Flintstone Lakeside electric drawing kit.
Oh, yeah, that was
now, was that a request by you, or did they just give it to you, or how did that...
Everything was a demand by me, believe me. I was an only child. My parents had been... They were a little older than most parents at that time. They were in their mid-30s, which was kind of unusual. Nobody ever confirmed for me, but I have a feeling there were some conception issues. And so I was kind of the golden boy. On top of that, in the 1950s, they were doing a lot of testing on school kids. And they first of all, they skipped me a grade. They skipped me from the 4th grade right to the 5th grade. Wow. And it turns out that I was in the very first group of kids in something called the GATE program, GTE, which stood for Gifted and Talented Education. And this essentially was a program where the kids like myself that had qualified for this, we didn't ask to be in it, we were just put in it, would be in the same classes from 5th grade all the way through 12th grade. And we were all much more supposedly gifted, which is a word I learned to hate. More intelligent, have more interest or passion for certain things. But they never told us this, but the real goal was to guide us all into science and math, so we would become scientists to kill the communists.
Ooh, wow.
And I have friends that became teachers who've confirmed that was the goal of this whole program.
Wow.
But for that reason, my parents were told, your son can do anything he puts his mind to, which again was like a curse, but still, for that reason, when I was, for example, they had me taking violin lessons. And I wasn't interested in music, at least not in that way. And I had to talk them out of the violin lessons because for about 2 months before it actually happened, there'd been lots of advertising about this new cartoon show on Friday night called The Flintstones. I was already a fan of all the Hanna-Barbera cartoons, Rough and Ready and Huckleberry Hound Show and Yogi Bear, Quick Draw McGraw. And, it was like, holy crap, I'd seen some photos, and it was like dinosaurs, and the main character looked like my dad. It was like, this is my favorite. I mean, how many 9-year-olds even have a favorite cartoon studio? But, cartoonist, obsessive from the word go, I think. Anyway, I had to do a 2-month campaign to talk my parents out of having me have that music lesson the same night as the Flintstones premiering. And finally, they just gave in. And, I never let go of that my entire life as long as they were alive. It's like, aren't you glad that you let me do that? But from that point on, it was like it combined the two things I liked the most. It was like a double obsession, gratified. So the first stuff that you get would all be print stuff, because that was the easiest stuff to have made. Right. When you have toys, you have to book time overseas now more than back then, but still, it's more complicated getting a toy made. Mm-hmm. But if it's a print thing, you can. And in the case of Western Publishing, they had people that had worked on the show doing the coloring books and simple stuff like that. That was the first thing that came out. And then there would be more complicated stuff, sticker books. And then the toys started hitting around 1961 or so. And being an only child, I didn't have any siblings, and my parents, weren't wealthy, but my dad had a steady, decent pay being an officer in the Navy. Mm-hmm. So I was very lucky. I got a lot of that stuff right, they fed my obsession. I also got a lot of comic books from the time, probably 2 years old, I was asking for comic books. Mm-hmm. And I asked my mom before she died, I said, that was like right in the fury of comic burning and Frederick Murdoch. And yet you were buying me comic books. I remember when I turned 5, like most kids my age, I had to go into the hospital for my tonsils to be removed. And I've talked to enough people my age online that seems to be where it was really cemented that comic books were our special buddy. Because, especially being an only child, you go into a hospital and suddenly you're there by yourself. Mm-hmm. And, there's nobody, you're not quite socialized yet because you're still pretty young. Mm-hmm. And there's kids from all backgrounds and all neighborhoods, and you're kind of like, wow, I don't, how am I going to, what do I say to this person? But I'll never forget, my dad brought what seemed to be, a 3-foot-tall pile of comic books.
Oh, she.
Well, it probably was more like 3 inches, but still, it was the most comics I ever remember getting.
It's still a lot, yeah.
And I remember specific comics that were even in that pile. That's how much of an impression it made on me. So, and in fact, I made a point to try to collect some of those because...
Were they all current issues off the stands, or is it just... old?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But it was mostly funny stuff. I remember the first superhero comic I ever saw was in there, a Superboy. Mm-hmm. But other than that, it was mostly stuff that I liked. Tom Terrific, Scrooge, Dennis the Menace, stuff like that. The good kid stuff.
Yeah. You and I are the same way. It's like we like the superheroes, but the real gold is, that other stuff.
Well, I like superheroes a lot too, but the problem is that it's all become the same thing.
Yeah.
But when guys were drawing superheroes that were cartoonists, and that's how Jack Kirby thought of himself as a cartoonist, mm-hmm. that had styles that weren't even trying to look real, that's when I liked superheroes. Mm-hmm.
And I assume Kirby's your favorite artist since you named your son Kirby and things like that, right?
Yeah, but he's well, that's too because I was friends with him, but my other favorite, who's just as big an influence, is Gilbert Shelton, the guy that created Wonder Warthog and Freak Brothers, and his stuff is probably more obvious because it's cartoony and funny, but Jack's storytelling really left a mark on me in terms of how to break down a story. Mm-hmm. And of course, when I was doing Captain Carrot, it really filled in because then I could actually imitate Jack's style to a certain degree.
Right. That is actually an interesting point. It's like Captain Carrot is kind of a hybrid of Kirby and Wonder Warthog. It's weird.
Well, that was actually the point. When Roy Thomas and I created it, was what if the way we sold it was what if Jack Kirby drew Mighty Mouse?
Oh. I never knew that, I mean, I knew the Kirby influence. I didn't know that was
the original pitch was going to be for the Just a Lot of Animals to take off on the Justice League of America. Mm-hmm. And it's all buried in storage now. I wish I could find them. But the pages, the sample pages I did, they were being attacked by a giant carrot from outer space who looked like Galactus.
And of course, we
never used that for Captain Carrot. We did a character called Bunny from Beyond that was kind of like that. But, I like superheroes a lot. But the problem is, I think it was last year, 2 years ago, they did a new Plastic Man comic, and a friend of mine was writing it, and she writes really funny stuff, and I thought, boy, this is going to be great, and I picked it up, and it was depressing as everything else that comes out of the comic. It's like, hey, we let's make a depressing Plastic Man. Nobody's done that yet.
I have noticed that on comic books nowadays. It's like I read very few new ones because, there's an overall kind of depression, and I don't know if it's because sales are down and other things, but it's not as lighthearted as when we were kids.
No, it's because they're competing with other entertainment.
Yeah.
They're competing with robbing a bank isn't a big deal anymore. Even destroying the universe isn't a big deal anymore. But if it looks like something out of Criminal Minds, then it's something that's relatable.
Right.
It's like I sound like an old man I am an old man, but it really disturbs me that they feel like they have to keep upping the stakes rather than saying, let's up the quality.
Right.
The idea that they keep trying to get more extreme, as they used to say in the 90s.
Right.
They've left no place for them to go now. The last biggest news in Batman is we all got to see Batman's penis.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, what? And then they pretended they didn't know it went through the system. I got to tell you, when a comic book gets published, especially one in a new format like that, it's scrutinized by 800 different people. They saw it and they loved it. They knew they were going to get a lot of news out of it.
Yeah.
And that's how comics operate now. Marketing has taken over the world of comics, mm-hmm. and it doesn't really matter what they're publishing. They'll figure out some way to sell it to somebody.
Right. Let's see. What other things I was going to ask you about? Let's see. Let me ask you about how you got into comics in the first place. I mean, I guess you've been asked that before, but I mean, were you trying to work for the majors, or were you trying to do underground, or was it just anything that came along when you were getting into comic books?
I was just pretty much trying to get in anything that came along, but quite honestly, I loved underground comics.
Yeah.
That was like the last time I was really excited about comics, because a couple of years before that, I went to high school with I was very lucky because of this GATE program. I was in classes with a lot of other nerds, so by the time I was in high school, I was, buddies with 3 or 4 of the guys that with myself helped come up with Comic-Con. Mm-hmm. So, we were all pretty serious about comics and science fiction and horror movies and all that stuff. Back then there wasn't so much coming out. You could afford to be a fan of all of it at once.
Right.
And but one of them was Greg Bear. He wound up becoming a well-known science fiction author. John Pound became a well-known illustrator and fine artist. Roger Friedman became a physicist and an author. It's like we all wound up kind of in different areas, but we were all still fanboy nerds. And where was I going with this?
Well, you're talking about forming, which is a question I had, forming the San Diego Comic-Con, or what became that. I mean, How did that happen? I mean, you don't just suddenly say, "Hey, let's do a convention." How did that happen?
Oh, I just remember the point. We'll address that, but the point I was about to make was about Underground Comics. Is that we were all talking about, because we were reading Marvel and DC and, me funny stuff too, but we were all I don't know, 14, 15, and we were all saying, why are comics just about specific genres? The westerns and war stuff was still around, romance stuff was still around, the Archie type stuff, but there wasn't anything about, like documentary comics. There weren't any things about, somebody just writing and drawing something from their own point of view about their life, or, something that wasn't fit any of the genres. And when Underground Comics came out, it was like we had never seen anything but fanzines.
Right.
And it was, and fanzines was just more of the same. Oh, here's Conan with a sexy woman, except now we don't have to have her with a chainmail top on. She can be topless in this fanzine. Well, that's great, but let's see something other than a barbarian for a change.
Right.
So it wasn't anything that exciting. I think the biggest deal before Underground Comics, I actually asked my parents for Christmas to buy me a bunch of issues of Wits End magazine.
Oh, wow.
Which was a fanzine that Wally Wood put together, but it was all by pro cartoonists. And that had some nudity in it, and they kind of freaked out, not knowing I was already hiding Playboys in the behind, underneath my shirts. But the Undergrounds just blew my mind, and especially because the first one I bought, I was in La Jolla my first week in college, and I would go to a sandal shop, and they've got an issue of the first Freak Brothers appearance in a comic called Feds and Heads. I'd already been buying Gilbert Shelton stuff since junior high, because Help magazine was reprinting Wonder Warthog, and the Drag cartoons had new Wonder Warthog stuff, and he was already one of my favorite cartoonists. So now, just about as I'm becoming a hippie, suddenly I see Gilbert Shelton is doing a comic book about what's essentially the Marx Brothers as hippies. And it was like, I got to have more of this. And then I got Zap Comics, and then suddenly there was this whole wave of it, and I wasn't old enough to be drawing them quite yet, but I certainly was old enough to be buying them and really digging them.
Yeah.
And I bought every one I could find, and I still have every one I ever bought.
Oh, wow.
I'd buy extras if I wanted to leave it around on the, in the house I had with my other slovenly, roommates. Who, we'd have the requisite table made out of an old telephone cable spool, and there would be a candle in a wine bottle and a bong spilled on the table, and then some Underground Comics. So you kind of figured those were just going to get destroyed. But anyway, the Undergrounds, you look at them now, and like everything else, it's only about 10% of them are any good.
Right.
But it was just, my funniest story about Underground Comics relates to Jack Kirby, because he knew I liked him, and I was asking him about him, and he told me how much he liked him, and I thought that meant that he liked reading Underground Comics and all the X-rated material within. And it turned out that Jack meant that he liked the fact that there was no house style and that everybody owned their own material.
Right.
So that completely missed my brain. I drew this very pornographic poster in honor of Jack, and a friend of mine printed up 1,000 of them, and I gave one to Jack, and Jack turned pale, very pale, and said, I'm sorry, but I have a family, I can't have this poster. It's a long story, but Jack was very cool about it. They didn't call the police or anything.
Yeah. So it seems like he more appreciated the freedom than the actual
absolutely
pornography or anything of it.
Yeah, but he knew I was doing Underground Comics by that time, and I think he was the nicest guy, because he hadn't been an angel when he was a kid. He was in a street gang, and he grew up Jack was a tough guy. I mean, not tough to his other people, but he could take a lot, and he probably had to dish out a lot at one time or another as a kid.
Right.
So I think he remembered what it was like to be kind of a young, callow youth. So he never came after me. In fact, before this happened even, it was, I think, at the first, no, by this time it probably had happened, but it was at the first Comic-Con that was at the El Cortez Hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend Terry Stroud had brought a huge Roman candle. And the way that the El Cortez was constructed, it kind of surrounded the pool. The pool was in the middle of it. And so there were rooms going high up on two sides and really high up on the third side. And we were down by the pool, and Terry pulls out this firework, and we're going to set it off, and Jack walks by, and Terry yells out, "Hey, Jack, you want to light this thing?" And Jack starts walking over, and he goes, I'll never forget, Terry goes, "It's the boom tube, Jack." You know, for his fourth world new God stuff. Jack, just for a second, he comes over, and I remember really, he had this look in his eye like, yeah, that'd be fun. And then he says, boys, I don't think then he suddenly, because he's looking around, he's realizing I could set fire to the hotel. And so he walked away, and we set it off anyway. And it didn't set fire to the hotel, but it certainly could have.
Yeah.
That was the same pool we also threw shark repellent in one year.
Oh boy, I've heard about that.
No shark attacks. But that takes us kind of there to Comic-Con. So see how I did that?
Good segue.
So what do you want to know about Comic-Con?
Well, I mean, how did you come up with it? Was it your idea, or did you just go along for the ride, just saying, "Hey, I'll show up if you make it to Comic-Con," or
kind of most of the second and a little of the first.
Okay.
What happened was that we had our whole group of cartoonists and writers and fanboys at Crawford High in San Diego, and then we all graduated, and I was, or at least some of us did. Some of us are still there. And I went to a school called Cal Western, which is out on Point Loma, and it was near a little beach community called Ocean Beach, which was, just a haven for hippies and counterculture types and weirdos. And one of the weirdos had a bookstore on the main drag in Ocean Beach that was... it was science fiction in the front and pornography in the back. And that's not unusual in the history of bookstores,
right.
Because the fellow that owned it was a guy named Ken Kruger.
Mm-hmm.
Who'd been to the very first World Science Fiction Convention, or very first convention ever for science fiction in 1939, I believe, in New York City. And so he had been a publisher, he'd been a book dealer, he'd been a fan. He'd had something like, 14 bookstores over the years. He was a smart guy because he knew how to keep ahead of the cops. And yet he was a real legitimate guy. He wasn't scummy. He just knew that, unfortunately, the reality of it was, if you're going to have a privately owned used bookstore, pornography is going to keep the rest of it alive.
Right.
And in those days, it was not that unusual. In fact, there was a really great bookstore in San Diego called the Controversial Bookstore. And I'd buy underground comics there. I'd buy books on drugs there. I'd get all the stuff my parents wouldn't be allowed to see. And I once asked the fellow that created the book, not the Skeptic.
Kreskin?
Paul Kraskin.
Oh, that guy. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I told him about that's where I used to buy his magazine, and he said, did they have a beaded curtain in there? And I said, yeah, I guess they did. Why? He goes, did you ever go in there? I said, no, I didn't. And he goes, well, He says, how old were you? I said, I don't know, 15, 16. He says, well, you probably would have liked it. That was full of nudie magazines. Mm-hmm. and specifically sunbathing nudie magazines. And he said that in bookstores that controversial was the code name for We Have Nude Magazines. Which I never knew. Mm-hmm. Because when I went there, it was like, well, of course this stuff is controversial. It's all the stuff we're not allowed to talk about. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't sex. It was political more than anything.
Right.
So anyway, Ken was a very nice guy. There was nothing creepy about him at all. And he said, you know what? If you boys want to, I told my friends about it. They started coming down there. Pretty soon, he said, if you guys want to create a fan club, this is where you can have it. And so we created a group called the Profanists, because it was a couple of guys that were pros, a couple of guys that were mostly of us for fans, and then we became known as the Junior Woodchucks after, the Donald's Neck's Boy Scout type troop. And so... Meanwhile, I've got a job at a bookstore in Fashion Valley, a very legitimate, brand new bookstore, B. Dalton Bookseller. You might remember the chain. They were owned by a company that also owned the Target stores. And it was in this very posh, high-end mall. And so I got a job there, and it was a great job. I worked as a bookseller. And a fella came in and he was looking for these books that were reprinting the Prince Valiant comic strips, but in the form of children's books. And I knew about them because I'd already bought some of them out of the store myself. And it turned out we started talking because I thought, well, that's kind of interesting that you even knew about these. And he was a fan, a guy named Bob Sork, and he says, you might like coming. We have a fan club that meets over in Claremont Mesa, and you might want to come to it. I said, I sure would. So I went over there, and it was himself and Richard Alf and Mike Towery and Shel Dorff and a number of other younger kids. In fact, they were all younger than me. But Shel was kind of the guy that seemed to be the primary guy doing it, and he had moved from Detroit, where he was involved with a convention called the Detroit Triple Fanfare.
Oh, okay.
And when I went there, he was showing slides of Golden Age comics. I don't know where he got them, and but anyway, so I brought some of my friends, and by the way, by that time in 1968, some of my friends from high school, we had attended the World Science Fiction Convention in Berkeley in 1968.
Oh, okay.
Which was like an incredible eye-opener in a number of ways, as you can imagine, because, not only we go to our first convention, but, it was also permeated by the counterculture. and so it was just unbelievable. We had no life-changing experiences other than just seeing all the stuff around us, and we were these absolutely innocent kids who remained innocent for a while, but not for long. Because we went there the summer of '68, and then the winter, the fall of '68, I went to college.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, the two groups, it was interesting because most of the people that were involved in the one that Shel had assembled all were collectors, or dealers, and that's pretty much what they were all about. And all the people from the group of my friends, we were collectors, but we were more interested in becoming creators. And so we started talking about maybe having a convention, because Shel was talking about the one that he was involved in, and we were talking about the ones that we had attended. And that led to the first Comic-Con.
Now, was there talk at the time of bringing actual creators, or was that an afterthought?
Oh, no. We wanted to have, we did the very first one, we got the ones we could. We got Mike Royer, who was just starting to be an assistant to Russ Manning. We got Forey Ackerman, and we got a guy named Bob Stevens, who was a local editorial cartoonist for one of those San Diego papers. Mm-hmm. So we got a guy from comic strips. We got a guy that knew all about monster stuff, and we got a guy a local guy that actually worked for the paper drawing editorial cartoons. Mm-hmm. In my mind, that's a pretty good lineup for a first convention because it's all different things.
Now, was it hard to track these people down? Because it's not like nowadays where it's the internet and everything. I mean,
you're breaking up.
Oh, was it hard to track these people down? I mean, to find them?
Well, Shell seemed to have a lot of contacts. I'm not sure. We knew Forey Ackerman because a lot of us had been to Forey's house. We had Forey's phone number. I still remember his phone number. If you spelled it out on the old rotary phone, it was Moon Fan. I don't think it works now, and Forey's dead, so don't try it.
Yeah. No, it'd be weird if he answered, yes.
We've been to his house a number of times, and that's where I met my friends Bill Warren and Don Glute, who were both involved as writers in comics, and Bill wrote a column for Starlog magazine for many years. Mm-hmm. So we may have been the ones with the Forey connection. Mm-hmm. But then, but he, Shell collected cartoonist contacts, so he mainly was interested in comic strip guys.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I know over the years, and this is related, I suppose, because some of them showed up at the convention, because I've seen the photos, you've done, like, pilgrimages. You did, like, pilgrimage out to see Carl Barks and things like that. What were those type of trips like?
Well, the thing that Carl Barks had nothing to do with the Comic Con, that was just a bunch of my cartoonist friends.
Oh, okay.
But we did go to Jack Kirby's house a few times. Mm-hmm. And that was where Jack decided that he was going to turn some of us into characters for Jimmy Olsen. And that was a mind blower for everybody because we certainly didn't expect that, and then once we knew it was going to happen, it didn't happen nearly fast enough for it. The funniest thing is, Jack put us in there, but we don't have names. We're just the San Diego Five-String Mob, and it's obvious once he did it, he was like, I got to get rid of these guys. So it's like, by the next issue, we're all gone.
Now, through your connection with him, did you get him for the convention, or did he know about it in a different way?
The first convention was a one-day one.
Okay.
Later that year, we had a 3-day one, and that's the one that Jack came to, as well as Ray Bradbury.
Ah.
And so, between having people like that and the fact that we were in one of the best tourist places in America, a lot of people started coming to Comic-Con from the New York area because they suddenly realized, holy crap, I can deduct this whole family vacation as a job expense. Mm. And I think that's why. I mean, not only was because Jack had already moved out here, but then Neil came out, Neil Adams, and he gave it a glowing review to the people back in New York City. And then after that, Carmine Infantino had to come out, and Roy Thomas came out. It really took off after that.
Why do you think that is? Is it because of San Diego being kind of a touristy place?
No, that was my point. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because I always wondered about that as a kid. It's like, why San Diego? All these guys are in New York. Why not L.A. or San Francisco?
When you grow up in San Diego, you take San Diego for granted, but San Diego was a really great place to live.
Yeah.
At least if you're a middle-class white guy.
Yeah.
I didn't have any other experience, but I have no idea. But we weren't none of us were wealthy. We took the bus to get to places. We didn't have any place to meet for our meetings. We wound up meeting on my parents' patio half the time, and a lot of the time we would just meet. We'd say, okay, we're going to meet in the west end of the Balboa Park, and we'd just sit on the grass and have our meeting. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was really done without any, Ken was the guy that was the voice of reason. He knew how to sign the contracts.
Mm-hmm.
He knew how to plan for all the different possibilities of something going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Towery, who took it over, was a comic dealer, so he had kind of a business mind. Richard Alf, who I would consider he and Ken as co-founders as well as Shell, who decided. One day he showed up with a flyer and he listed himself on the flyer that he was the founder. And I called him out on it. I said, "Who said you were the founder? Aren't we all the founders?" And looking back, it was for that first one-day con. What adult in their right mind would call themselves the founder of something that might have been a complete flop?
Yeah.
It makes no sense at all.
Right.
But he was just had his mind on that that was going to be his. But in history has revealed that the only thing he really provided was the fact that he had a lot of contacts with cartoonists because he corresponded with them over the years.
Mm-hmm.
But he was very. The sad thing is he was really jealous of those of us that did get into the business.
Mm.
Really jealous. I mean, insanely jealous.
Interesting.
We won't go into that, but
yeah.
But anyway, that's why I'm glad the other two guys get credit for being co-founders now, because they actually did a lot more work than he did.
Right. Did any of you back in the late 60s, early 70s think that the San Diego Comic Convention would get as big as it's gone now a half a century later?
The one guy that absolutely did was Jack Kirby.
Really?
Jack would often say, in fact, somewhere there's a long quote about it that he delivered someplace, was that in the future, Comic-Con, where everybody was going to be coming, that would be the source for movies. The comics would be in big, expensive coffee table books, and the Comic-Con would be the place that would be like the intersection for all forms of entertainment. And look what it's become.
Yep.
That's the number one thing that people bitch about.
Right. How big it is? Yeah. Well, I mean, present company included, I have myself. I haven't gone in 6 years, so I do want to go back at some point, but I just have not. So.
Well, it is an ordeal to a certain degree. I mean, I'm very lucky because they treat me so nicely there that they make it easy for me.
Yeah. And I think about that. Like, Mark Evanier will go on Stu's show and praise how great it is, and it's like, well, yeah, it's great for you because you get to be on all these panels and host things and get behind the scenes, and meanwhile the rest of us have to slog around in lines, so I'm not really a fan of that too much. But
well, you just have to. I mean, you have to attend smartly. You have to figure out what you want to see ahead of time.
I get it.
Believe me, being on panels is no big thrill.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, I went to Comic-Con and I got to be on 5 panels. Well, that just means that you had to, walk through that crowd and then get up there and be asked 3 questions while the other 15 people on the panel tried to get in what they wanted to say.
True.
Don't think that it's some sort of exotic, wonderful experience to be on panels.
No. I'm just saying it's like, I guess what I'm saying is he has a little bit of special treatment, be it whatever it is.
Well, I do too.
Yeah, so I get it.
But it's good. I'm old.
Yeah.
Don't go on.
So, chalk it up to a little bit of jealousy on my part, but I'm also happy that you get it. So there you go. So.
Well, you didn't have to put up with Shell Dorf.
All right, touche. Changing subjects a little bit. How did you get most of your jobs? I mean, this might be a leading question, but I'm just kind of curious, working for, like, Marvel or for, like, being the senior art director at Ogilvy and Mather, which I was going to ask you about, or even designing toys for McFarlane. How did they come to you, or have you sought them out, or both?
There's no one answer other than I've always been very good at being in the right place at the right time, which obviously is something I can't control in the slightest.
Right.
Worked in when I lived in San Diego. I had a full-time job that had nothing to do with cartooning. I worked in bookstores or worked in libraries, that sort of thing. At least I wanted to be around things I liked, which was books.
Right.
But then I moved to Los Angeles, and I wanted to work full-time as a cartoonist. I had friends that had a comic book shop that was about 2 miles down the street from Hanna-Barbera. So I wound up, I said, look, can I manage your store? But can I have my studio in the back of the store? Fine. So now I had free storage for my collection and a place to work, and it was the same place where I was selling comics. And it may be the first place ever where you were selling comics at the same address that a comic was once a blank piece of paper on your desk. Because I wound up working on a comic called Quack at the time from Mike Friedrich. I'd already been doing underground comics because Ken Kruger hired John Pound and I to do some stuff, and once people started seeing my stuff, I started getting work a little bit at a time. Not enough to live on, but certainly enough to be building my career. But the underground comic stuff was good, but when I worked in the comic book shop, that's where I began to meet other cartoonists outside of a comic convention. So that's where I became friends with Roy Thomas, who had moved to LA at the time.
I see.
So that led to me doing the Man Spider story for Marvel, which led to me doing Captain Carrot with Roy for DC. It also meant I was meeting lots of cartoonists from Hanna-Barbera, and none of them hired me, but now I had more people. Now I knew kind of what they were looking for, what to say, how to act. I tried to get into Hanna-Barbera when I was still living in San Diego, and they said, we're not doing underground comics. You need to show us some samples of what you actually do with our characters. Ooh. That made sense. It never occurred to me. So, about the same time, Charlton Comics had worn out its welcome because they had the Hanna-Barbera license, and the foreign publishers who were reprinting the stuff hated the work because it was so slipshod.
Right.
And so they withdrew the license and granted it to Marvel, and Marvel hired a fellow out here named Chase Craig, who'd been an editor at Western Publishing.
Yeah.
Turn hired Mark Evanier to write them all for him.
Yep.
And Mark recommended me as a job, that I could be a good inker. That led to me starting to work in mainstream comic books. I was still doing underground comic books, and then working on the H&B stuff was great. And then that led to the Man Spider story. and then I got a call from Hanna-Barbera because they saw my Hanna-Barbera comics, which were being done through the studio only in as Mark and Chase Craig had offices there, but maybe they'd take Takamoto would take a look at her first issues to make sure that everything looked right, and after that point everything was cool. But they liked the work I was doing. By that time I was penciling them too. And they called me and asked me if I wanted to work on staff, and I said, well, I kind of like freelancing, and probably just like, and they said, well, we're doing a new Flintstone show. I said, when do I show up? And they actually hired me quite a few months before the Flintstone show started, so I actually got trained working on the Godzilla show that Wildy produced. And I'm not very good at doing realistic humans, so I wound up just getting scenes where it was just monsters. And Doug always referred to me as a Bigfoot cartoonist, being not the monster Bigfoot, but because back in the 1940s and 50s, that's what they referred to guys that did gag cartoons, and guys with big noses and big feet.
Right.
So I was delighted because I didn't really want to draw those other characters, but monsters I love drawing, so that was fun.
Right. Yeah, they referred to anybody who did Harvey Comics as Bigfoot cartoonists, the Casper Richie Rich stuff.
Sure. So,
yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, they kept me around so I could work on the Flintstones, and that was a show called The New Fred and Barney Show. Not a great name, but I wound up working with a lot of the guys that I'd grown up, idolizing, and that wound up, one thing led to another. Then I left for a while to work on Captain Carrot, but then came back after I'd been working around the business and wound up being a writer and then a producer there. So,
okay.
And it worked out pretty good.
So how did the Olga B. and Mather thing come about? Was that just in conjunction with Hanna-Barbera? Were you working at both, or?
No, after being an H&B and having such short deadlines on stuff, and quite honestly not thinking that the work turned out particularly stellar, I thought, maybe I'd like working on commercials. And a couple of times they would enlist me to do commercials there. And I thought maybe that'd be something interesting. And then I started getting jobs doing commercials with the Flintstones. And then at some point I called them up and I said, I know, the art director had just quit. And I called him. I'd never studied advertising or art directing, but I said, I can art direct him. Why don't you hire me? So they did.
Wow.
But the deal we made was they had to pay me extra because I said, what is the point of me art directing if I'm not drawing them as well?
Right.
I'd already been working on them, drawing them, but I wasn't making any of the decisions. So suddenly I'm working there, and I'm working on Pebbles and Alphabet cereal commercials, and I'm actually wound up pretty much writing them too. And after a while, I was writing them, and I was drawing them, and I was voice directing them, and I was I was hiring the studio that took them, and then I was also getting paid extra not only for my work on that stuff, but for doing the box art and the prizes that came in the cereal. And it was just a great job because it was like I finally had the time and the money to make funny Flintstone cartoons. I was selling horrible cereal to children, but it was still such a great gig to be able to make these characters look and act funny the way they actually were supposed to be.
Right. Because, certainly the animation and the layouts are a lot better than a lot of the later Flintstones TV shows. Maybe
we had more time, and we had, we were shipping out a show a week at Hanna-Barbera and Deke and the other studios I worked at. But we had 8 weeks to do a 30-second commercial with over $100,000. That was more than we had to spend on an entire half hour of a Saturday morning cartoon. So we could make them look good, and we could do it with the animators here, which meant better communication,
right,
and people who actually knew and loved the Flintstones rather than people who'd never really seen them before.
Right.
So, it was really a great gig for me.
Yeah. I know you hired our mutual buddy Mike Cazala a few times on those commercials and things like that.
A few times. Of course, Mike and I like working together anyway because he gets it and I get it. He actually animates funny, so I wanted people that could take my stuff and make it better. In Saturday morning, you have the work up front that's done is pretty good, and then every step it gets worse.
Yeah.
With that sort of stuff, as with feature film, hopefully every step it gets better, not deteriorating. And then in that case, it did. It surprises me how many people still know which ones I worked on.
Yeah.
but I think it looks pretty obvious.
Well, they stand out. Yeah, they do.
Had a hand in them, yeah.
Well, who were some other people that you hired, just out of curiosity?
Gerard Baldwin directed a few.
Oh, yeah.
Sam Cornell did some. One of the voice things that was really funny. I hired. I always made sure that if we had Mr. Slate, we got John Stevenson. If we had Wilma in one, I got Jean Vander Pyle. I think I hired her to do her last performance as Wilma. But I get interesting people sometimes. I needed an alien, so I got Lorraine Newman. We had to have a shark, and it was a giant shark, and he had a funny line at the end, only one line. And I was like, well, who are we going to get? I thought I wanted to have a deep voice, but just kind of cool rather than scary.
Uh-huh.
We got Lou Rawls.
Oh, wow.
The voice was sharp. One line. But you go, shit, that's Lou Rawls. It was really good. So stuff like that was fun. But I've worked with an awful lot of celebrities, so it wasn't really the thing of, ooh, I get to hang out with a celebrity as much as, I get to cast somebody in a part that probably is going to be odd on their resume, but might get them more work doing this too.
Now, did that job did you just get tired of it, or they just wanted to move in a different direction as typical?
No, what happened was they didn't need me anymore because Post was divesting themselves of their children's line because they were having so many problems with parents groups complaining about us selling stuff to them.
Oh, brother!
So when they didn't need me anymore, they didn't need me anymore. They still did some commercials for a few months, but then they turned it over. They sold the whole thing to Quaker Oats, and that's now when you see ads for Pebble cereal. There's no animation in them at all because they don't have the money to.
Right, okay. Yeah, in fact, I barely see...
And why they even spend the money, because most kids, that's all kids know the Flintstones for now, is selling cereal.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of a shame, but, at least, you were all excited. At least they're bringing it back, or brought it back, I should say past tense, to MeTV, so at least they're kind of getting on there, to kind of reach...
Well, yeah, look, those characters, they'll find some way to do them. I worked on a show that was so horrible a couple of years ago that they actually only aired it once and then canceled it on Netflix. It was called Yabba Dabba Dinosaurs. Did you hear about that?
I think I heard the name and never saw it.
Yeah, well, it was with Pebbles and Bam Bam. It was kind of a cute idea, I thought. Pebbles and Bam Bam kind of being the ambassadors or liaisons between the people living in Bedrock and the dinosaurs out beyond Bedrock. They weren't domesticated. And because they kind of do a lion and, pull a thorn out of a dinosaur's foot kind of thing. And that was the setup. But the problem was, some idiot at Warner Brothers decided they would look better if they redesigned them to look like anime characters and to make all the dinosaurs look like Pokemon. That was made as a pilot. I never saw it, but apparently it flopped. And from that point on, they decided, well, the concept's still good. So then they did it in that style that I don't know what you call it other than naive. It's that style that makes it look like a child actually drew the cartoon.
Oh, yeah.
Like that Scooby-Doo series they did a couple of years ago where it all looked kind of like an underground comic version of Scooby.
Right. That's weird.
And you can look it up. It just looks horrible. And now I understand Elizabeth Banks, the actor, is trying to promote getting a new lifetime, primetime Flintstones thing going. So who knows? Those early shows, watching them on MeTV, the one thing that really sticks with me is the stories themselves are no big deal, but even in the first season where they're still really figuring out, and they are so off model and so out of whack looking, and some of the animation flubs are unbelievable. That end shot where Wilma's asleep and she doesn't have a mouth, I can't believe they never reshot that. But the fact that they're actually funny lines and likable characters, and a lot of the drawings are genuinely funny, which we don't get in TV cartoons anymore. And it makes me very emotional watching those because I realize I wasn't nuts. Those early episodes especially are really good.
Yes.
And of course they're also extremely non-PC now too. I don't know if you can do a show like the Flintstones now.
Yeah. Well, they've always watered it down every later version, seemingly, except for the one. Did you work on that one where The one where the Flintstones on the rocks. The one where
No, I didn't. There was something weird going on with that one though, because even though it was quite well done, they never aired it again.
Right.
There was some sort of political issue at the studio. There had to have been, because I mean it was 2 hours, I think.
Yeah.
Which was way too long. It should have been a mini series.
Right.
But yeah, that was well done, and I knew some of the people that worked on it, but it just seemed like it was it was kind of like the John Carter of Cartoon Network. It was born dead.
Right. I managed to get a copy of it, so I'm happy to do that, because I know it's not a home video, but...
Well, I think, I mean, it wasn't promoted very well. I think they aired it in an afternoon or something. So it's like I don't think they ever even bothered to find out if people liked it or not.
Yeah, I didn't see it when it originally was created. It was years later that I found it. I didn't even know about it, actually. So...
Yeah.
Now, did you work on any of the...
I worked on a feature-length cartoon that nobody's ever seen.
Which
it was for Australia.
Oh, that's right.
No, not the one you're thinking.
Oh.
No, it was a like 90-minute long cartoon with all of the Kellogg's spokes characters trying to promote healthy eating habits.
Oh wow! No, I haven't heard that.
It was Tony the Tiger and Smokey and Snap Crackle and Pop and Cornelius the Rooster and all of those characters.
Mm-hmm.
And we had slobby fast food characters of two Hippo brothers voiced by Jason Alexander and the guy that everybody always thought was me. No, he was Newman on.
Wayne Knight.
Wayne Knight. Yeah. And we did the whole thing, and it was really funny and really weird. And at the last minute, for some reason, the money ran out, and they couldn't do the post production.
Oh, geez. So
it was done. It was made, but it wasn't made.
Yeah. So how many times has that happened? Because I was referring to that other thing that where the animation studio that went out of business. I forgot the name of it.
Huck's Landing.
Yeah, that one. So how many times has that happened in your career where you work on something for a long time and then the carpet's pulled, as it were?
That happens all the time in animation.
Oh, geez.
I worked on another thing that I was convinced was going to change my career, and nobody ever saw it. When I was a producer at Hanna-Barbera, they came to me and they said they needed a sequence for a film, and it turned out to be a sequence for Steve Martin's movie Parenthood.
Mm.
And there was a sequence where he was going to take the kids to one of those matinee cartoons, that they used to have, where it'd be some really bad thing made just to kind of, slough off on kids that were forced to watch it. And it was a thing called Mr. Bobo Boots. And it was, and I've never worked on something like this. I had Babalu Mandel himself come to see me, and he said he had a drawing of Mr. Bobo Boots that somebody had done on a cocktail napkin. And it was like a guy's head sticking out of his pants. It was so screwed up. And it was like giant boots. It was kind of like Yellow Submarine drawn by an idiot, those characters were walking around. And it was just horrible. And I said, well, you want me to fix this, right? He goes, no, I want you to do it exactly like
God.
So I did about a 2-minute sequence, and what they wanted, you'd only see it kind of behind what was going on, but they wanted it to be bad and funny enough that they could have, like, cuts to the screen and then cut back to Steve Martin having an argument with his kids while the movie was going.
Yeah.
And I did about 3 minutes of it. I worked with a couple of animators there. We didn't send it overseas, and for being horrible, at least it was funny looking.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get a message from this guy that I'm working with, who's Ron Howard. Ron directed it. Mm-hmm. I never met with Ron, but they said Ron loves it. He goes, he wants another 2 minutes. Here's some more material. Here's another bit of track. So we did another couple of minutes, and then I I'm telling all my buddies, they released it during Comic-Con.
Mm-hmm.
And people at Comic-Con are going, hey, maybe we'll go, people sometimes, back then they didn't have as much to do. They go to a movie sometimes. They go, oh, go make sure you see Parenthood. It's got a sequence I did there. Oh, okay, great. And they come back and go, we didn't see anything in there. What are you talking about? So I called up, I forget, I guess it was Imagine.
Yeah.
Is that the name of our company? Yeah,
well, that's Howard's company, yeah.
And I called him up, and I forget the guy's name, but I mean, he was younger than me, the guy that was the liaison. I said, I'm not upset, but I said, I haven't seen the movie, but I hear it's not in there, and I know things get wind up on the editing floor.
Mm-hmm.
The person who answered the phone at Imagine said, I'm sorry, but he's not there. I said, well, when's he going to be in? She said, I'm sorry, he died.
Ooh. Wow.
They're not trying to keep me and get rid of me. That's a little too extreme. But it's like I never did find an explanation. Apparently the movie just maybe ran too long, or they felt it interrupted the flow. But that was a shocker too. And I've never seen. I mean, what we did was completely produced. So they must have never shot the live action, because I've actually bought it a couple of times on home video, thinking, oh, well, they'll have spliced it back in.
Right. Or at least have it as an extra or an outtake or something. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Like that incredibly great. They've got the original ending for Little Shop of Horrors on the Blu-ray.
Right.
Where the monsters win.
Right. Another one I was thinking of, and you talked about it on Stu's show, didn't you do like a treatment or character designs for Clyde Crash Cup?
Oh, I did a presentation for
that's
the Clyde Crash Cup cartoon show, yes.
Yeah. So
and they only showed, the Bagdasarians only showed it once to Fox, and as far as I know, it's still in somebody's closet.
Wow. So I guess...
I spent a lot of time and money on that, but no orange paint.
Wow. It's too bad you can't retrieve...
I was told you can't use any orange because Janice doesn't like orange. And I remember, because I was writing it too, I said, how about letters? Are there any letters I'm not supposed to use?
It's too bad you can't retrieve these projects back. I mean, I know you don't have any rights to it, but I mean, just to have copies of it, it seems like they just kind of go into this limbo of nowhere.
I probably have copies of everything I've ever done, but it's all in a storage space in Bakersfield.
Oh.
I mean, look, after 47 years of this, I don't throw stuff out, but I can't have it sitting around. I did have a studio that was full of it. Now I got a different house. I had to put it in storage, but whoever wants to go out to Bakersfield and go through stuff with me is more than happy to come out. Whoever hears this, let me know.
All right.
I had some guy that I don't know, he must have had more money than sense. He was buying old storyboards for I forget how many. He was paying like $100, $200 a box for Xeroxes and stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, I was making some storage money on that.
Cool. Well, let's see. Let's kind of finish up here with what you're currently working on. Aren't you doing some children's books and things like that?
I am actually inking as we speak. I'm working on a sequel to Maroon Lagoon, which was a book I did 2 years ago, and this is called Maroon Lagoon 2. It kind of ties up elements of the story. It's a 76-page picture book. Comes with a razor, so when you start reading it to a child, he can actually be shaving by the time you get to the end of it. I'm also working on and off. It's out there, but we're going to be adding things to it. A video game based on the Garbage Pail Kids cards, which I worked on back in the 90s, I think.
Cool.
But anyway, there's this new video game called Garbage Pail Kids the Game. Exciting. And I'm also finishing up my book on Oddball Comics, which will be out next summer from Tomorrow's, which is a fine publisher of books about the comic book business.
Mm-hmm.
And my book is called Scott Shaw's Oddball Comics. 200 pages of the craziest comic books you ever got published, and every one of them you look at and you go, how the hell did this get published?
Right.
It's enjoyable. It's not your average book on the history of funny books, I'll tell you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one especially.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping to get it done soon, so...
And I'm also looking forward, no pressure, but to you're illustrating the cover to my Monkeys book with Michael Ventrella, so...
That's right. I'm looking forward to doing that, too, because I like drawing stuff that's completely in my own style like that.
Right. And you did a great cover. I want to give you kudos again on the first Monkeys book that Michael and I did. You know, you did a la Mad, 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 Mad World, and, you know, you went above and beyond the Call of Duty, so I will give you total kudos for that.
Okay. Well, that's almost as good as money.
Yes.
I'm surprised you didn't get Jose Delbo to do it.
I had to get the guy that at least worked for Rhino Records, which we didn't even talk about, but, you know.
I used to do a lot of good stuff for Rhino.
Yeah.
That was a fun gig.
So, we've talked about your current projects. If anybody wants to get in contact you or see you on the internet or anything else, give us some plugs.
Oh, well, look for me at shawcartoons.com. I also have a portfolio page on Facebook. And by the way, on November 10th, I will be appearing, that's a Sunday, I believe. I'll be a special guest in Pasadena's ToonCon, which is all about cartoons from the 80s and 90s. I'll be doing drawings and selling all kinds of cool stuff, as well as being on a panel called The Worst Cartoon I Ever Worked On.
Okay. I will try to get this on...
That will be a 7-hour show.
I will try to get this uploaded before that time, so... And I appreciate you, Scott, being a guest and being my friend all these years and working with me and listening to my nonsense fanboy talk to you. All that stuff.
Always enjoyable, Mark.
All right. I thank you very much, and I will talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Thank you for listening, and thank you again, Scott Shaw, for being my special guest. Episode number 47 will be coming soon. If you would like to comment and or be a guest on this podcast, please drop me a line at funideas.mark@gmail.com. Become a patron of Mark Arnold and Fun Ideas Productions. If everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, that would be a tremendous help in continuing the production of my books and this podcast. Also, subscribe to my YouTube channel. The opening and closing music for the Fun Ideas podcast is provided courtesy of Andrew the Slow Poisoner Goldfarb and is used with permission. This has been the Fun Ideas podcast. This is Mark Arnold speaking. This episode is copyright 2019 Fun Ideas Productions. Thank you very much and have a good night.
Popping creation pills in the pink electric church. The final flicker of your illusion.